You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I hope wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing, you are doing very well. The bloke that you're about to hear from, his name is Mark Brzezicki, and he's the drummer in long-running UK outfit Big Country. There was a bit of a problem with my recording software, so the opening question didn't come through actually, so all you hear is Mark's response. Now, the question was, the Australian tour that's coming up, what can fans in Australia expect? So why don't we cut to the chat with Mark? Here we go.
Yeah, we do get asked that. I mean, you know, we're a rock band at the end of the day, but we've been a band that's been around for a long time. So, you know, you can expect people that will be there will already know who we are. They may have even been to see us 3 or 4 years ago when we came out there. But there'll be a new generation, hopefully, there that will be interested to see what the band's about. Those who have come for curiosity and those who come because they've heard about the band and they know some of our hits we've had and never had the chance to see us through some reason or another, through our own fault for not coming out back in the day, or you know, through people being at work and stuff. So it's going to be a great gig. It's always an emotional gig, Big Country, particularly by the fact that, you know, our songs are very, I suppose the lyrical thing, you know, is very moving. The words are very powerful that Stuart wrote. People relate to a lot of the lyrics like people do. They find their own things within the lyrics. And, you know, it's, when we were there last time, it was quite emotionally charged. You know, I could see people were very emotional hearing the band play after, you know, never really having the chance to see it live and longing to hear some of those songs. So from the fans' point of view, they're going to love it. From a curious point of view, you're going to love it anyway. If you like good music, it's a great band. So it's going to be a great band and probably powerfully charged because we're a powerful band.
So, yeah, I know on that point, you know, your 10 albums with Big Country, we're going to talk about the rest of your career after we've got the questions about Big Country out of the way, but, you know, 10 albums, 10 albums in your career with Big Country, numerous music videos. I think I've lost count of how many music videos that are out there, and also countless tours. So can you talk about what some of the highlights have been?
Yeah, well, to me, I don't notice the highlights because it's you know, it's a journey we're on. You know, it's like looking at your photos. Your music is like a musical snapshot of your career, if you like. That's what the albums are. It's like a photo album, musical album, and for that reason, I find it hard to define. It's like picking out photographs. You know, you go and you pick out your best ones because you know whatever because you remember, but then you go back and look at those photographs again, you think, oh my God, I didn't really realise that, you know, blah, blah, blah. Same with the music, you know, it ebbs and flows with what I think are my highlights and my low points. Sometimes the most trivial things can be a high point for me, and sometimes the biggest things can not be as special. You know, it's one of those things. I don't really have a high and low point. I mean, for me, I think every gig is very special, and I'm not being cliche to say that, but, you know, every time we play, it's a special moment to be able to play the music and to have somebody come and hear the music is very special. Obviously, you know, I suppose stereotypical high points for me would be doing Top of the Pops, where you know you're actually miming on that, but you're actually fulfilling a childhood sort of career ambition when you wanted to be on TV. So that's a high point for me with the band. You know, the obvious ones are like when we support the Rolling Stones. That's a high point because we love the Stones and it's such a big gig, but wasn't really our gig, you know. But that was massive as well. Going to Russia was massive for us, you know, for me. Having my father was Polish and my wife's got Russian ancestry, so that's special to me. You know, Barrowlands as a concert in Scotland, you know, is seen as like Big Country's home. But for me, I'm from London. You know, what was special for me was, as much as I love Barrowlands, what was more special for me was playing the Hammersmith Odeon, which I always longed to play when I was always driving over the flyover, looking down at that gig and hoping one day that I was in a famous band and I would see my band up on the awning, which I then did. You know, so getting in the charts is obviously, you know, hearing the song played on the radio the first time is a really big buzz. You know, and I still love hearing our songs on the radio. that's something I never thought I would achieve, and it's a great thing. You're on your way with the band. So many highs, but some of them are, a small club somewhere where we've had a fantastic gig, and we played in America, and even I love America, and I love playing out there, and we did one show in the middle of nowhere, and there wasn't many people there, which there wouldn't be on a Wednesday night in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, the rest of the shows were great. But that was really special because those who came got the same show, and we actually got to meet them all. So it's very mixed what my special moments are. But obviously, the stereotypical ones would be obviously the success of the band.
Yep.
Having a #1 album with Stilltown was immense for me. And then the fact that we're still playing, as older guys in the music industry, we're still able to go out there and play.
Yeah.
And that's special when you get older as well,
It is, with so many not able to do it. And no, look, it answers it beautifully, But I want to ask you a question about probably my favourite track from the band, which is Republican Party Reptile. So with all that's happening in the world today, the lyrics are very fitting. However, I'd probably
many people don't really... I'm surprised you know that record.
Yeah, I know it wasn't one of the big ones.
What album was that on? Was that Why the Long Face?
I think so.
Why the Long Face?
What happened was I've actually stumbled across the video on YouTube first. So I've got it in my playlist of one of the videos that have sort of repeatedly comes on whenever I put music on in the background whenever I'm entertaining my kids and the like. So probably couldn't tell you specifically the album that it's from, but I love the slide guitar.
No, I think it's No Place.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, well, what I was saying is I'd probably just change the title these days to Political Party Reptile because of the way things are sort of trending. It seems like the nature of politics these days. You've got to be a sociopath to be in either side of the political equation. But, my question about that track is that a track that survived through to the current set list?
Sorry, you broke up there.
Oh, sorry. Is that a track Republican... Is Republican Party Reptile a track that survived, and is that on the current set list? Will you be playing that in Australia?
No, we never played that at all, That was on one of our kind of... I can't explain it. We sort of have highs and lows in our career, and certain albums resonated and were big and blah, 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 but it wasn't relative to the musical output. And No Place Like Home and Why the Long Face were kind of transition periods within the band. There was a lot of experimentation with the music at that time, and there was a lot of changes going on in the band. I remember the band that broke up in 1989. Stuart wanted to, not known to people this, he wanted to break the band up in 1989, and it was the band. We didn't publicly announce it, but Stuart wanted out, and I went and did other things, and they reformed, and I wasn't able to come and be full-time member with the band, although it's documented that I left, which I never did. But the point I'm making is, on one of those albums, I think it was No Place Like Home, it was on that album, I kind of flew in and played on that record at Rockfield Studios in Wales.
Yeah.
For the first time, not as a band member, although I hadn't actually left. I was seen as a session player on that. It's just the fact that I couldn't come back and join the band after they broke up and reformed when I wasn't ready to come back. I was out doing stuff in the States with Simon Townsend, Pete's brother.
How does that feel to be a session?
That record was it?
How does that feel to be a session member in your own band? It must feel a bit like as though you've turned up to the wrong party.
Well, I wasn't actually. I mean, from the public perception, I actually wasn't. There was another drummer they were using whilst I was seeing my time out with a contract that I had to do. I was contracted with it was on Warner Brothers. I had to. Sorry, it was Atlantic Records we were signed to, and I was doing an album with Simon Townsend, and I was also touring with Procol Harum and a few other things at that time.
Yeah.
Fears for Fears. I was doing a lot of session work. When Stuart had kind of internally, without going public, had split the band up, we stopped for an extensive period of time, and we all had to do our own thing. And I wasn't ready to come back when the band suddenly decided, when Stuart wanted to come back. I wasn't actually able to do that, but I was able to do the session and carry on where I was, going back on tour and stuff. And I always said I would come back as soon as I'd fulfilled my contract. So I did, and I came back after the Buffalo Skinner's album. I came back to do that tour, you know.
Yeah.
So that record is an unusual record. I mean, it was no different for me playing on that record to any other record. We're in the studio that we all loved at Rockfield. I've just come out of there actually last week with Tiffany, actually from the 80s. So I revisited that studio.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, I've just done some songs with her. But yeah, it's a great record. You know, we were writing some really, really interesting songs during that period.
Yeah.
Very different to what you would expect if you put them side by side to The Crossing or Steeltown.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, they showed a growth and a development in the band's writing, which some fans didn't like, you know, because, you know, I think we're in a position where, I've said this before, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. You know, if we stayed the same, we were told that we're never changing, we sounded alike, every record sounded the same. Those cynics would always use that as a stick to beat us with, you know, we have the same sound, da-da-da-da, it's the same song, blah, 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 which it truly wasn't. So if we ever changed and we, you know, we tried different things, a Les bagpipe guitar, you know, we brought in some keyboards and stuff, they would go, whatever happened to Big Country? They've lost their identity, you know, we're deserting them, you know, so we were damned if we stayed the same and we were damned if we didn't. So that was kind of like our sorting ourselves out period. I always felt those two albums were like the Big Country finding their feet again, you know, which they did, I think, with Buffalo Skinners. They kind of reverted back to, hey, we've tried all this stuff, we're getting nowhere, we're treading water, we can't please anyone, we can't even please ourselves, you know, so we'll go back to the being a rock band with you know, the formula that we had before, you know, in a certain way, you know.
You know, all bands go through that period where they do try different things. It's just whether or not fans can keep up or not. And for the record, the band's transitional phase produced great music, and this is my view, of course, I don't expect you to share this view at all, but you listen to some of the more recent U2 albums and they're just terrible. At least with Big Country, I've had a quick listen to most of the albums that I could find on Apple Music, and it's all very consistent output is the point that I'm making, whereas a lot of these bigger bands like U2, they release some stuff, and as an old fan, I sort of listen to it and I think, what the hell's going on here? What are they trying to do? Who are they trying to keep up with?
Well, you know, we were very much a band that were true to ourselves, even to our own detriment. I mean, Stuart was like that from the get-go, you know. We talk about having this kind of quality control within the band's musical writing. And by that, it kind of came from Stuart Adamson and more so, it became like the way the band felt collectively, that we all agreed on that same path. And that would be like if we had a song idea and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't very commercial, but it has a good vibe and the lyrics were very interesting and deep. And, you know, we had about 4 different sections to that song. You know, if we liked it and we felt it felt great, then it passed. You know, it was something we were going to do. But you know, if it felt like we were selling out, or we were, you know, record companies were trying to lean on us to be a bit more commercial, we couldn't kind of adapt to that. You know, and I remember some of the things that didn't make the records were amazing. You know, some of the demos we had. That, you know, there's a host of demos on YouTube now that people love that never made saw the light of day because, in hindsight, I think they were wonderful, but, you know, Stuart and more so from Stuart was saying that, you know, that's shite, that ain't making a record, you know, we'll keep that as a demo, you know, and yet actually they're amazing songs, you know.
Yeah.
Who's the judge? You know, music's music. I mean, a good example for that would be the first album, The Crossing, you know, that really broke the band. Which is what
that's your big one,
you know, there was one track on there that we never played, and that was it never got released. It was on the album, and that was The Crossing. It never made the album. The track The Crossing.
Okay.
You know, it could have been the title track of the album, The Crossing, and it never made the record. You know, it was an instrument. Well, it wasn't instrumental, but there's a lot of instrumental sections, and it's almost a little bit prog rocky in some ways. You know, some odd time signatures and things. But have you heard that track?
No, I haven't.
It's a great piece of music, you know, and it's called The Crossing, and it was meant to be on the album to represent the crossing, and Stuart said, "Nah, we'll leave that one out." You know, he was very much like, "Nah, it's not good enough," or you know, it's no, you know. So yeah, we've because of that, I think, what you said earlier, if you take a snapshot of everything we've done, it has a continuity of not only quality, but within the,
Agreed.
the uniqueness of the band's sound and songwriting was always very much our own. We didn't really look to our left or to our right to try and be like somebody else because they were having more success than us. To our own detriment, to be honest with you. We didn't really play that card that the record company was kind of hoping.
I think probably to your advantage now in your long
the band
career.
couldn't. Yeah. Stuart couldn't deliver that stuff if it wasn't hard, if it wasn't meant.
Yeah.
He couldn't deliver that stuff. We could write it, but he had to feel comfortable with what it meant and how it could be played live and how he felt it would be perceived. So
yeah,
it was very much his own quality control. So yeah, I think other bands, you just mentioned U2, maybe they were less like that, which is what made Big Country's continuity.
Well, actually, there was probably a tangent at some point where Big Country could have been as big as U2 if there'd been a break in the US. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were making, we were breaking ground in the USA. We had Grammy nominations at 85. We were on Saturday Night Live and some really big shows. So, yeah, we were making good headway there. But, with America, it's such a big place, it's such a big country. There goes a bit of a pun there. You had to keep the pressure on. You had to stay there. And the likes of U2, Tears for Fears, and all those bands that, came along and took America, the way that they did that was obviously they had quality to start with, obviously to resonate with the public, but they stayed out there and did the work. I remember we had a lot of opportunities, and if I'm very honest, some of them through the pressure of being on the road all the time. Big Country's a family, and with that comes people that you don't see, wives and families, and that has to be looked after as well. And I know Stuart struggled with that throughout a lot of his career. And, decisions were made why and when we didn't turn up to places. Even Australia, we didn't turn up, through not being able to get out there for certain reasons, personal reasons, and most of those were family reasons.
Yep.
So we missed some big chances. I remember we were an Elton John tour we didn't do. We didn't do a police support tour. Things that could have broken us out in America at that time. And we could have stayed out there. We should have and could have stayed out there. But it wasn't. The focus became more localized through the management and to keep the band more local, where you could keep more of a family structure in the background. Not for me personally, because I wasn't married at that time. But yeah, that we didn't do Live Aid, which was a shame. That didn't quite go right. There was some misunderstanding about our availability, so who knows what they yielded.
But you played. But you personally,
at some point.
You played at Live Aid, didn't you?
Well, we only sang at the end. We didn't perform as Big Country. We came on and sang "Feed the World" at the end because we're on the record, giving an announcement on the actual vinyl.
Yep.
We all say our names individually, and I was working with Roger Daltrey when Bob Geldof was doing his solo album when Bob Geldof came in the studio to visit Roger to talk about that event, and he then asked me about Big Country, which I put onto my management, and then it just took. I think there was a misunderstanding between communication between the management and what was going on.
Okay.
And in the end, the slot was taken. So we were involved in the whole day and the whole event, but not really. Had we been on stage playing some of our songs when we were really in the charts, who knows what my story would be now? Who knows? But that seems to be like the fate of Big Country. It's when there's always a positive and a negative with things. Musically, it's amazing, but there's always the undercurrent things that stops things from being as big as it should or could be, which was a real shame, So, in a way, I always felt an unfinished business, in America as well. I love going out there because we hardly go out there. And Australia and New Zealand, great places to play. So another reason why we're so excited to be coming out, myself personally as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so this is at the point in the interview where I want to start talking about you as an artist, because I had a chat to Bruce Kulick, who of course was in Kiss for a while. Both yourself and Bruce Kulick probably occupy a space where, even if you hadn't tried to hear your musicianship, I think anybody who's even listened to radio for, 5 minutes are going to hear a track that you've played on. So I don't really know where to start because you've played with so many people you've performed and recorded and done work with the Cult, the Jam. I know it was called From the Jam, but I just call it the Jam. Members of the Who, Ultravox, ABBA, Joan Armatrading, Peter Gabriel, Sting, and there's heaps more. The first track that I want to ask you about, or the first band that I want to ask you about, though, is a little bit obscure, is Go West. So my question for you is, did you end up playing on the track Don't Look Down?
It's a yes and no answer to that. Yes, I did. It's kind of the producer of Go West was Gary Stevenson, a very good friend of mine, and I was in a band with Gary at the same time that we were recording The Crossing with Big Country. We were going to put a band together. It was very Go West in its sound, and Gary was good friends with Richard and Pete, and Gary being a really great friend of mine, and he loves my drumming. He got me to go into Soundwest Studios, and I played along to some of those tracks, including those songs. And Gary was really into sampling and rejigging some of those songs. So as far as when I went down there, he said he had this project with Go West, which was a new band he was doing, and I went down to the studio, down to Soundwest Studios in London to record those tracks or those songs. Mm-hmm. And it ended up that we ended up playing along to them, and Gary playing around with them in production. So some of those, as far as I remember, it was my drum sound on those, but Gary had programmed some of the placements for them. And a drummer called, I think it was Tony Beard, as far as I remember, came in to do some overdubs and probably went through the same procedure as well. I'm not sure how it actually played out. That's the thing, what you hear at the end of the day. But I was involved in the Go West recording. And I ended up playing with them live a few times at the Princess Trust.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah,
they weren't actually in the studio when we did that. Yeah.
So you played with
as far as I was led to believe through Gary, the producer, it's my snare and drumming on those hits. So that's what I know at that time. So I was doing so much session work that that was another one that I went in the studio, came out. And I was paid as a Go West session, if you know what I mean, so for that period. So, yeah, so I take it that I'm still on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love that video that's on YouTube of you playing at the Princess Charity Trust, because Mark King's playing bass in that clip as well. So did Mark King do the bass for work for Don't Look Down, did he?
No, I don't think he did, no. I don't think he played bass on that album. I may be wrong. But the Princess Trust were great concerts because it was one of those situations that, I was drumming with my hero, Phil Collins, who I think is one of the greatest drummers in the world. Big influence on me, along with Stuart Copeland and, say Simon Phillips and the greats from the 70s, Billy Cobham and that era. And it was wonderful for me to be able to be involved for many years, with being in the house band, as in the house band, with the house band being Eric Clapton, Elton John on piano. It was a ridiculous band to be in. Phil Collins and myself on drums, and George Harrison on guitar. It was just ridiculous. So that alone was amazing, but it was also doubly amazing for me because the guests that they were coming on to play, I'd already worked with, because I'd worked with so many people that when they were coming on to play, I'd already worked with them individually on their albums. So it was like a big family reunion for me musically with the guys coming on. I knew everyone that was coming on within reason because I'd done something with them at some point in their career. So that's always been an amazing thing for me, which I'm very proud of. It kind of expanded my CV, obviously, for working with people on that position, like with Peter Gabriel and the Bee Gees. When the three of them were all together, all that. I still pinch myself because I'm still a music fan as well as a drummer. I'm very proud to be involved in that stuff. And Midge, the MD, because I was working with Midge on his solo records as well. Mm-hmm. He always loves working with me, and likewise myself with him. And he was always very generous with, always loved me on those sessions, on those Princess Trust shows, because we always had a great band, and I again. A lot of the artists coming on I'd already knew, so again, it was not one big family. Yeah,
So,
I mean, playing on these records is great. The Cult was a great record to do at short notice, and the Pete Town stuff's amazing. They're all very different. I did stuff with Fish from Meridian and his solo records.
hmm
Different hat on, I put on, and I do like the fact that I'm able to switch into different genres of music. But at the end of the day, I think I can still sound like myself. I think you can still tell it's me on drums, and that's something I always wanted to achieve, because I always felt that the drummers that I always liked back in the day, it's a personal thing. I'd always loved hearing drummers that you could tell who they were. Like you could hear John Bonham's sound, you could hear Phil Collins' drum sound, unmistakable. You could unmistakably hear Stuart Copeland's sound, and even get into the more obscure ones, like from drummers music. I could always tell Simon Phillips' sound, or Steve Gadd's sound, or Billy Cobham's sound. And I wanted to be one of those drummers that had an identifiable sound, and apparently I've got that. So that's something that I don't hear so much these days, on record, because of the way it's produced now. Things of generic drummers tend to be very low in the mix these days, or if it's a drum machine, it's sampled, and it's really hard to hear the identity of the drummer anymore. I can't tell who's drumming on stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I don't know how I achieved that, but I was just very, again, like Stuart was with the music, I was very true to my drumming. Oh, excuse me. I played the same snare drum throughout my career. I still play the same snare drum to retain my sound. And I tend to use the same cymbals, and I tune the same way. And I've got certain discipline in the studio that I always maintain the same sound. Yeah. I'm not sure if I've spun off too much there with my answer, but
No, you've touched on a few really important things, and one of them was your work with the Cult. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you performed on She Sells Sanctuary, which is probably their most well-known track.
well, you see, it's a very interesting conversation, this, because I performed on the Love album, and I'm in the She Sells Sanctuary video, but my history in the Cult was due to the fact that the She Sells Sanctuary was already recorded with Nigel Preston. And he was, obviously, sadly he died through a drug overdose. And they were having big problems with Nigel due to his lifestyle. And at the end of the day, they needed to press on with the album that was to be recorded, the Love album, which included She Sells Sanctuary. So they called me up at short notice to say, can you get down to Wimbledon Studios and play on, just turn up, like the next day. The next day they asked me, in 24 hours, can you turn up and do the video for She Sells Sanctuary? Which obviously I came down and put on a New York police jacket, leather jacket, and tried to make myself look a little bit. Took the check shirt off, and put the other shirt on and the jacket on. And they were great guys, they were great friends of ours anyway. They were from the same management. So Billy and Ian, we were great friends anyway. And it was after doing that they said to me, look, we need to go straight into the studio and record this album. We can't use Nigel because, he's hospitalized, he's not turning up at things. And there's a sad story regarding that, and I'm not too too clear about. But he was very unreliable and subsequently sadly passed away, which is a tragedy. But I was able to go into the studio at short notice in Guildford and really just hear those songs pretty quickly played to me, and I would knock down the drum tracks, one by one in that course of that week to finish the Love album, which, has got the other hits like Rain and The Phoenix and all that stuff, great songs in itself. So that was a great album for me to do, and I've since been able to play with them as a guest when they've had the original lineup, when they were celebrating the anniversary of the Love album, including She Sells Sanctuary, and come and play that live, which was a joy for me, and play some of the songs off that album that I played on. So the Cult, that was a very special thing for me to play with them. And I had no idea when you do these records that they would go on to be as big as they were, because they were just breaking at that time, coming out of the Southern Death Cult into their kind of newfound rock goth thing at that time.
Well, Guns N' Roses
and then
era.
it kind of developed into more of an Americanized rock thing that they did. They embraced the big hairband thing of the 80s, which was very successful for them. But for me, it's a special album for me as a drummer. I'm very proud to have played on that. And the fact that a lot of the public see that as one of their best albums. It's certainly an evergreen one for the Cult. If you really could document the Cult, that is one album that's a special one that I play on, and for that I'm very proud of.
So, being a drummer, let's talk about bass players. You played with one of the very best in the biz, which is Bruce Foxton from the Jam. So that must have been tremendous to have him in front of you. I mean, I know you play with Mark King as well, so there's another fantastic bass player. But, you work with Bruce. Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, Bruce, again, is a great friend of mine. He's a super guy. And, I was always a Jam fan. And, obviously there's a special relationship musically as well as being a mate with bass players. It's the way it works for me is that the drums is the rhythm and the bass links the rhythm to the music. There's a massive link between the drums and the bass, hence it's the rhythm section. And, it's great when you hear great bass players. My ears always prick up when I hear great bass playing. And from the start, in the Jam, not only did they write some fantastic songs, as part of my youth growing up, but the bass playing was always phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. One-off, individual style, unique sound, not unlike John Entwistle from the Who in his tone. And he was influenced by John, hugely. As not only does he sound like it, but he's told me that as well. And I put a band together. We supported them with Big Country when they were doing their Big the New Breed farewell tour. We did 6 nights at the Wembley Arena with them, which was fantastic. So we were kind of on our way up, and they were kind of splitting up, which was terrible for Bruce, really, because it was a breakup that they didn't really want to see happen. Bruce and Rick, the drummer. So long story short, I ended up, in the ups and downs of Big Country, me and Bruce Watson put a band together with Simon Townsend, with Bruce Foxton as the Casbah Club. So I ended up working with Bruce back in the day, back in the 90s, and we got on really well, and then kind of did our own thing. Big Country got back together. Bruce did his own thing, Stiff Little Fingers. Excuse me. And it was later that From the Jam were playing, and they needed a drummer after Rick quit the band, and I was still with Big Country, but we were kind of reforming Big Country, and that was during the period we'd lost Stuart, and everyone was doing their own thing, and I was able to. Bruce called me up and said, do you want to come and play with me and Russell Hastings, who's an amazing guitarist and songwriter himself. Mm-hmm. He does a great job doing the Jam stuff. A lovely guy too, and ended up working with Bruce, and it's an absolute joy working with Bruce. He's a phenomenal bass player and a wonderful guy. But the energy that he's got on stage and the sound is, it still gives you shivers up the spine when he plays. He's one of those evergreen bass players. He's a bass player's bass player with a unique style,
sure.
Of that era. He's one of the greats, as is Mark King and a few others. So. Yeah, I was very honoured to play with Bruce as well as Mark, obviously.
How did you... Mark King has a very unique style, so I'll say now I'm a bass player, and I love a lot of players like Larry Graham.
Oh, right,
bass
okay.
style. So I gravitated toward Mark King at a very early age. I mean, what's it like playing with a bass player that's so... he's so competent on the thumb slap and slap bass side of things? Is a bit intimidating sort of sitting behind a guy like that who's going all over the fretboard and doing the things that he's doing, because I know I have troubles with some drummers, to be honest with you, from the perspective that whenever I do that sort of stuff, some of them don't know where to look. They're fairly traditional rock drummers. You've crossed over into a lot of genres and are an extremely competent drummer. But even for you, having a guy like Mark King in front of you, does he occasionally just turn around and go, watch this, mate, come with me? That sort of thing?
Well, it's, I grew up doing the prog and the jazz fusion stuff when I was younger, and I made my sort of fame through Big Country, which was a very different style of music. Although the drumming I tried to keep interesting for that reason, So I was always really capable of playing that kind of stuff. I was always playing quite complex drumming before I was in Big Country. So meeting Mark was a joy because Phil Gould was a great drummer when I used to hear the Level 42 stuff alongside when we were doing Big Country, and to hear the rhythm section of Mark Gould, Phil Gould and Mark King together was wonderful, because Mark was a drummer before. He plays great drums.
All right.
So he played bass. Obviously he was the king of slap and still is. But he's also a great bass player when he just plays with us, just plays slow blues. He can play anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, his forte is that really wicked stuff that he plays, groove-orientated stuff. He's a real bass player's bass player, you know. So it was always an ambition of mine to work with somebody like Mark. But then you heard the wonderful grooves that Phil Gould was playing with Mark as well, which really worked well. And I was able to lock in instantly with Mark, you know, because he thinks like a drummer, and you know, especially with doing level 42 songs. So I found it really joyous to play. You know, Mark's a really great percussive bass player, and you know the subdivisions that he plays. You know, he's playing so many notes that he's like a click track whilst you're playing. So he's a very easy guy to play with in that respect. You know, because he does the outside stuff, but he still maintains that wonderful groove that you're following. He doesn't leave that. He kind of embellishes around it. You know,
you're right. You're bang on.
And I love that about his playing. Yeah, he's got such a good pocket that as a drummer, you know, he's a good guy to play with because the pocket's there and he thinks like a drummer. So you're kind of getting a really easy connected route there, as well as, you know, obviously when he's playing outside that stuff, it inspires you to join him, you know. So yeah. He's one of those players that once he starts getting busy, you know, you can start catching those busyness with him, and vice versa. If you do stuff, he's on you straight away. So there's that. He's got that wonderful link that, you know, the instinctive things. He kind of knows and predicts what we're going to do as a drummer, you know, because he is a drummer as well. So he can play like that, and so you have that great communication happening with Mark that makes a really great rhythm section, you know.
No, awesome.
So it was a joy for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
A great response. Now, to somebody left of centre, I don't think a lot of people would recognise, and correct me if I'm wrong here again, but you work with Frida Lingstad in ABBA, not when she was in ABBA, but afterwards.
I worked with Frida on a solo album. Phil Collins had done an album before, and she was scheduled to do a new album, and Phil couldn't do it. And Steve Lillywhite was drafted in to produce, and it was recommended that I do the record, which was a joy to me, because Phil had done the earlier album. And we went down with Steve Lillywhite with a great band, actually. We had Kirsten McCole on backing vocals. We had Frida, obviously, there from ABBA. We had Benny and Bjorn play, obviously, as well on some tracks together. So at some point I was with ABBA minus Agnetha, you know. And we had Simon Climby on keyboards and Tony Levin from Peter Gable's band playing bass.
Wow.
We recorded an album called Shine. In fact, Stuart Adamson wrote a song called Heart of the Country that he presented to Frida, because I was playing on the album, and I managed to get a song to her. And she loved the song and said that she's going to do it. And we did the record, but it sounds like Big Country playing. I mean, there are reviews where they're wondering, is it Stuart Adamson playing his guitar and his EBow? But it's not. You know, it was... I can't think of the guitarist's name off the top of my head. But it wasn't Stuart. It was the session guitarist that was playing. Peter Glenister, that's the guitarist.
Okay.
He was playing guitar. So it was a wonderful album. And to get to know Frida and have Ben and Bjorn on the same records with me was amazing, because I was a big fan of ABBA anyway, you know. But it was a slight departure for her musically, because she was experimenting with new sounds and a new style that she'd done in the previous album with Phil Collins, and we kind of continued that sound, the big drum sound on the record, and you know, having Kirsty sing backing vocals as well was a joy as well with Kirsten McCole. Obviously, she was married to Steve Lillywhite, so
yeah,
you know, that was a wonderful album to do. We did that in France, so it was very special for me, being out the country doing something, and you know, it's a unique time for me, that record, and I'm very proud to have worked with Frida and Ben and Bjorn on that record. So yeah, I'm very blessed to be able to say I've done that, you know, because I'm still a huge ABBA fan. I thought they wrote the most amazing songs, you know. Incredible songwriters and production. You know, they were like the pop version of Europe version of Steely Dan for me. Not in the musicianship, in the songwriting structure. You know, they were incredibly well crafted songs. You know.
Yeah. So they're known as being fairly reclusive in 2018, but it probably wasn't like that back in those days. What was the social scene like around Frida and the rest of the guys in ABBA?
Well, obviously. You know, she was a big star back then, as she still is, obviously globally, but really coming out the peak of her career in the early '80s. So, yeah, I think she's a normal person at the end of the day. She's a very down to earth person, but obviously she would, she attracted a lot of attention every time we went out. If we went to a restaurant and stuff, that was sort of signing autographs and things. But at the end of the day, she's a lovely person, very down to earth, very grounded. And it was interesting of that era, of that time to see and be out with her at that time, But once you scratch the surface with these people, at the end of the day, they're no different from us. They're normal people that have having to deal with success. All I can say, it was a joy to work with her, and it was incredible to work with. Very, very accommodating, always into hearing new ideas, and you allowed you to be you. She wasn't any diva or anything of anything at all.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Joy.
Well, somebody who has a bit of a reputation as being fairly fierce when he feels like it is Pete Townsend, but apparently is a fabulous bloke. So, what's a funny story, or a story at least, that you could share about your time working with Pete?
Oh, working with Pete again. I mean, I sound like I'm just saying the same soundbite, but it's true. I mean, it's a joy to work with these legendary people. I still pinch myself and think, it's unbelievable. But they become your friends over the years. I mean, I auditioned for Simon Townsend when I joined his prog rock band back in the day at the Who studio down in Shepperton Studios. I had no idea it was Pete's brother, who he was, and then I met the family. I turned up at Simon Townsend's house and saw Keith Moon's hovercraft in the front garden. Wondered what the hell that was. This green sparkled hovercraft that apparently he'd driven down the Uxbridge Road and got stopped by the police. Some nonsense story, anyway. Then I ended up meeting Pete, obviously through meeting Simon and his mum and dad at home, and his brother Paul. There's a whole family event here. They're great friends of mine. So Pete's a great friend of mine, as well as the Townsend family. So yeah, funny story with Pete. Well, I remember we were doing the Psychedelics album down at Ilpie Studios, and Pete's very experimental on this album, which is what I love about Pete. He lets new ideas flow. He's controversial in sometimes in how he plays, the musical ideas, and he said to me on one of the records, he pulled up a TV monitor in front of my drum kit because the studio wasn't in view. The drum room was separate from the control room. So he pulled up this TV monitor in front and said he was going to conduct me, which is wonderful because then Pete's conducting me while I'm playing. But at the same time, he said to me, on this particular song, Mark, don't stop drumming until I tell you to stop. So I said, what do you mean? He said, it's simple as that, Mark. Don't stop drumming until I tell you. So I said, okay. So anyway, we started the track, and then halfway through the track, Pete kind of tiptoes into the studio, kind of making a shush sound with his finger, as if to say, keep drumming and don't let me disturb you. Uh-huh. And as we're recording, he starts taking away my drums from under my feet. He moves my cymbals away, then he moves my hi-hat away, and then he moves my bass drum away, he takes my stool away, and I end up ending up with no drums. I end up almost standing up with nothing left in front of me, and then I obviously have to stop because there's no more drums. And that was something we experimented with in the studio, really to sort of to push my drumming so that I would have to forcibly move somewhere else and not rely on my entire kit to develop the drum groove or whatever, the drum thing. But he wanted to experiment with me, so that was I never forget that. I was it's such an unusual studio thing to do. I didn't see what was coming, but it was a great experience for me to experience that, and
yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
What the breakdown of your drum kit, the removal, with how it would make me, what I would search for regarding what I had left, It's probably hard to explain on the phone, but as a bass player, you'll know what I mean.
I totally get what you're saying,
say, so you can't play that string. You've got to do your notes on the other string. You've got to think differently.
Oh God, yeah.
Well, that was a funny story for me. I don't know if it was a funny story for somebody else.
Well, if it's not in the public domain, what I find people like to hear, especially about someone who is so revered as Pete Townsend, they like to hear unique stories of how a musician who interacted with him, a story that they can share. So in that regard, mate, no, I mean, I certainly haven't read that story, so it's going to be a bit of an exclusive. And because I host the podcast series, a lot of people in North America and also Europe listen. So, yeah, who knows, mate? You might get somebody asking about it a bit later on.
Yeah, no, interesting. Pete again is very experimental. He on that album on Psychedelic, he had some original and some redone backing tracks. He wanted to hear some of the drumming in a very basic way. We had a lot of that Won't Get Fooled Again sequencer parts that were playing, and I was inventing some new guitar lines on the top, and underneath I had kind of delayed drums and things going on underneath. He was a very innovative guy to work with, a very exciting guy to work with for me, because you got to expect the unexpected, as well as experimental stuff aside. He writes some great songs as well. Some powerful songs. Some of his solo album stuff I really enjoy playing on. So he writes some amazing songs, as well as he still has that creativity there, his uniqueness that he always brings to the table.
What was his not biggest hit as a solo artist, but was it Face to Face or Face to Face? Did you play on that?
No. I started off. I played on A Little Is Enough on Empty Glass album, and then I subsequently went on to do the rest of his albums jointly with Simon Phillips playing drums, pretty much half and half. And then Simon wasn't available anymore. I think we did, I can't name the albums, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, White City, Empty Glass, I said, Psychedelic, Scoop, and of a few years back I did some new songs with him for an album called Floss. It was, again, I think it was a book or a musical he was writing. We did many tracks on that new record. I don't know if it ever came out or he's released some of them as little tasters. I'm not sure what's happening with that project. So I'm not sure what your question was. Sorry, I've waffled too much.
Oh no, it's all right. I just was talking about the track Face to Face. I think it's called Face to Face or Face to Face by.
Oh
Pete.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't play on that, but I played on a host of other albums and tracks. So not that particular one. I think that was Simon Phillips playing drums on that one.
Oh, that was just the most prominent one that I remembered.
I played on Face Dances, the track Face Dances, but that may not be as known as the other one.
All right, yeah. Hey, I'll ask you one more question about an artist that you've worked with, and that's, I mean, God, there are so many. I've still got, there's a few here. Ultravox, you did the Uvox album in 1986. You worked with Joan Armour Trading, Peter Gabriel, and Sting, but I want to find out what your work was like, or what you did with Peter Gabriel.
No, that was live. We played live. We played Sledgehammer live with him.
Right.
We did the Albert Hall, and we played live with Peter on that one. Again, that was a Princess Trust-led event, and being his drummer on that was amazing, because Manu Katché played drums on that particular track, and I ended up playing it live. So that was I love Manu's drumming as well. So that was a joy to play with Peter on that. But live, that was.
Were you?
But the Ultravox, just going back to.
Yeah.
I was going to just say what was interesting for me, only because you brought it up, was with the Ultravox album. I was already working with Midge on his solo records, along with Mark King on bass, and my brother played bass on some of those records as well. My brother Steve.
Yeah.
And Midge had said, "Look, Warren's left the band. Warren Kahn has left Ultravox. Will you come down to Germany to do the new Ultravox album in Neunkirchen in Germany with the legendary Kraftwerk producer Connie Plank?" It was an interesting session because Connie had never ever recorded a drum kit, apparently, and by that time I was using quite a large drum kit. My kit was getting bigger and bigger, as the endorsements were, giving me more stuff, and I was trying new ideas out, like gong drums and 2 hi-hats and 2 snares. And I turned up at Connie's, because Mitch loved all that stuff. He loved the fact I was being quite innovative of that time. And I turned up with my big drum kit, and Connie kind of looked at it and went, how are we going to mic this up? I only have a few mics. So we mic'd it up as best we could. And I remember his control room being tiny in this, in extension from his house. And it was an old radio, like 1950s radio desk, kind of mixing desk you would use in a radio station, where the faders, when you pushed them up, it made the music go quiet. It worked in reverse.
Yeah. Apparently
that was so if you nudged the faders, it wouldn't just get louder, it would go quiet, And it was like a little 8-track, it was tiny. And he had all these reel-to-reels and all this old school technology in there from back in the day. He was a very great producer for that electro stuff. So it was an interesting album for me because he'd never recorded drums like that. And so he didn't really have a blueprint of how to record it. So my drum sounds a little bit different on that record because it was Connie's interpretation of getting a drum sound for me from what he perceived it as,
Yep.
But it was a great record nonetheless, an interesting record. And I became a member of Ultravox. Mitch said, "No, you're in the band." I couldn't stay in the band because I was still in Big Country, but I was able to kind of spin the plates because I was working on all Midge's solo stuff. I kind of kept the plates in the air. I could do the recordings more so than I can do long tours, although during our downtime I did extensive touring with Midge, covering those tracks plus his solo stuff, Likewise, I was in Procol Harum for 17 years during my tenure with Big Country, so that was another great band to play with,
Yeah,
we did 2 studio albums with those, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm on these subjects.
Okay. Look, I've got one more question for you, sir. I've got to ask you this one here. Mm-hmm. So, were you ever considered by Mark Knopfler to replace Terry Williams on the recording of Brothers in Arms? Because I know he brought in Omar Hakim, but you must have been very close to one of the drummers that he was thinking about replacing Terry with for the recording sessions.
I would hope so, but I would never have known that,
Yeah.
I worked with Mark on Joan Almond Training's album.
Uh-huh.
He ended up playing it. He ended up playing guitar. He was booked to play guitar with Joan, and I think it was Pino Palladino on bass.
Nice.
And a long story short, when he came down to the studio, he actually ended up kind of producing the record along with Joan because he had such a knowledge of studio technique and work. He ended up kind of playing guitar and producing. But no, we got on fantastic, and he really loved my drumming. I'm very honoured that he did, and obviously mutual respect there, big time. And I wouldn't know if he'd considered me, but I know at that time I was so busy that I was, almost like I was on what you call like first call drummer for most things at that time. I didn't realise at the time, only in hindsight, when you start seeing the body of work, you think, oh, hang on a minute. I just said yes to everything.
It's massive.
When I could do it, I would do it.
You have originally.
So I don't know. I don't know that to be true. If it is, I'd be very chuffed to think that because I always loved his drummers. I'd met him actually. Funny enough, I did meet him back in the day when I was before I was in Big Country.
Yep.
We were touring with a band called On the Air, which was a pre Big Country band. Me and Tony Butler and Simon Townsend were the 3-piece, and we were touring, and Dire Straits were on tour at the same time, and we met each other so many times in the same hotel, so we got to know them really well. So possibly I was on his mind. I'd like to think so, though.
You must have been up there. I mean, it's I mean, you're probably only your head.
It's very likely, but I don't want to be saying, oh yes, it was, when I don't know. So it's a nice thought, and I wouldn't see why not. But at the same time, I don't know that to be so, but it's likely.
Yeah. Look, that's it from me. This has been a wonderful discussion. I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours or so, just about all the wonderful things you've done.
Yeah, I'm good at waffling.
No, it's great. It's been great. I mean, you literally.
All right. Well, it's lovely to talk to you too.
You know.
Can I just say one thing? I am doing my own solo thing. I mean, I was, I was in Thunderclap Noon when I was singing. I was a lead vocalist for 8 years on drums and putting a band. I put that band together. But I do like singing as well. You see, and I've got a prog rock band that I do called ESP. We've got a brand new album coming out, 22 Layers of Sunlight, which also features Peter Coyle. He's singing now from the Lotus Eaters. Do you remember them from the 80s?
I think so. Yeah, definitely rings
First
a bell.
Picture of You. Do you remember that song?
Yeah,
so he's. We've got some shows coming up with them. It's my prog rock thing that I'm doing. When Bruce is out with the Skids, I'm out with that, and I'm also doing a project with Simon Hoff from Big Country, with his own project and his solo stuff. And I'm also doing this project with Simon Hoff and Derek Forbes called Big Minds, which is half Simple Minds and half Big Country. So I'm keeping myself busy with that stuff at the moment.
Wonderful. Wonderful, mate. All right, well,
okay.
Good to know.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic discussion. Congratulations on a wonderful career.
You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and that was my conversation with Mark Brzezicki, the drummer in long-running UK outfit Big Country. Thank you so much for listening.